Was actually backfilling him a little bit on some of your cool travels and background, and that honestly, that'd be a great place to kind of kick things off if you want to jump in with your just wonderful history and the break and all the cool things that you've done.
Yeah, thank you. I have to laugh when I think about the timeline. I think I shared with you when we talked before. I'd love to believe that I don't look as old as I am, but when I start talking here in a minute, I think I'm going to be telling the whole story on the timeline here. I started in banking 2 weeks before Y2K.
Mhm.
And so that, felt kind of risky at the time because we all thought planes would be falling out of the sky and, money would have no value. And, I thought maybe these folks know something that the rest of the world does not know. But this was in 99. So this was the advent of internet banking, online banking. And you can do some research, and there's some dispute around which bank was the first to take it to the internet or to the World Wide Web at the time. But just speaking kind of in general terms about what was going on, that was dynamic. That was about as big a change as you get, when you think over the course of, who keeps your money safe in history. So that's when it started. And then not long after that, it was 9/11, and checks sat still on tarmacs and in trucks and semis, and Congress figured out pretty quickly we've got to do something different so that these checks can settle for full and final credit. And so they brought us the Check Clearing Act of the 21st century, which brought us remote deposit, which was the next biggest thing that's happened in banking. And, fraud's been around since the dawn of time. But once you had all these original documents sitting around, fraudsters got hip to the value of that paper. And you can see today, what's going on in terms of mail theft and statistics around mail theft. So you had, a real shift in focus on fraud protection services and waves of that, over time. Um, you had imaging that became a reality now that you could do the deposits that way. You had lockbox taking on a whole new flavor, integrated receivables. And we could talk for the whole hour just on the evolution of the products. But I think where we kind of got interested in having this conversation was kind of the then and now, the before and the after. So my background is in Treasury Services, and I had the really neat opportunity in 2001. I was thinking about this the other day. It was approximately a month before 9/11 that I had the opportunity to start what became the Treasury Services Group for a very fine bank in West Central Florida. And we grew right along with that, that product life cycle, product development cycle path. So I really did get to see, I won't tell you I've seen it all, but I've seen a lot of it. From 99 until 2021, COVID was a big event for my family. And I took a career pause for family in spring of 2021. And coming back now after, not quite 5 years, a little more than 4 years, but for all intents and purposes, just a big, taking your hand off the pause button event. So what strikes me most is that as disruptive as things feel right now with the economic uncertainty. We've had economic uncertainty before. We've lived through the Great Recession. We've lived through COVID. We are living through economic uncertainty right now. We've had innovative technology disruption. You could take a lot of parallels from what the experience was learning to trust internet banking and apply it to what is emerging with AI. There are a lot of parallels to be had there in terms of then and now. And I think from my perspective, I think there's a lot of wisdom that can be grabbed from the past and used in today, especially for community banks, which I know is the area, that you all serve predominantly, and hopefully bring some peace of mind. Maybe, we could talk through today some perspective and some peace of mind for community banks to say, okay, listen, there is nothing new under the sun. This has been done before. We have lived through this, and there are things that we can do to condition ourselves to be ready for all of these things. Near term, ISO 20022, mid to long term, what will the durations of AI be in banking? And how will that affect community banking? How will that affect commercial payments, commercial deposit products, Treasury Services? That's really my niche. And so that's really kind of the gist of, I think, how we got connected and what I think I can bring to the party in terms of interesting conversation.
I love it. I really like that I was telling Stephanie, I intentionally did a little bit of this look forward, look back, right? And sit and think and really try and sit back right now and say, if I showed up today with a fresh perspective, what would that be? Right. And it's such a weird time right now. But if you're able to remove yourself from it, I like the nothing new under the sun. It's still just banking, right? I mean, I haven't seen anything that we're all doing that is any more than bending something that's been done before, twisting
Right.
something in a new way.
Well, and I think you're right about all of it, because the reality is, if you just refine it to its lowest common denominator, what are the elemental pieces here? Money has to move. That value exchange has to happen. And it has to happen for full and final credit. And it has to be reliable. It has to be secure. It has to be compliant. We can just kind of rope it off to the US for today's purposes, but in every jurisdiction, it has to be compliant with rules and regulations around how that happens. And it has to be private. It has to be a private event between the parties that are involved. So there's an information security ecosystem that has to exist. Now, what that looks like, you know, that's going to be tactical and situational and circumstantial around the event itself. But if you reduce it to the lowest common denominator in each one of those cases and think about what are the elements here that, let's just clear the noise. What are the elements here that we're really trying to create systems around? That's really all there is to it. And that is wash, rinse, and repeat to a certain extent, And so from my perspective, the core competencies around how financial institutions engage with that's really the difference between success or failure, fight or flight or freeze, and you ask an interesting question. If someone were to come into this brand new today, and I guarantee you there are new bankers coming out of, banking school, coming up through the ranks in their financial institution, maybe coming out of some of the programs that do certifications like Certified Treasury Professional or, some of the others. And if today is day one, or if this more or less, is the first time out of the gate in conditions like this, then it's probably deer in headlights. That's probably a legitimate feeling, because which way do you look? Which foot goes forward next? We talked a little bit the other day about why are things so slow to move? And I would tell you, I think that is more of an asset than it is a liability in the go-to-market approach with all of this, because it feels like it wants to rush. It feels like it wants to be here tomorrow. And maybe it will be. But if history is any predictor of future events, much more likely there's a lot more elasticity in the timeline than we feel like there is, because faster payments are here. Now, why aren't they completely here all the way around, everybody doing the same thing? Well, ISO 20022 is a component of that. But if you think about it, and my hat is off every time, to Peter Davey and the Faster Payments, Council, and, the group that brought us that reality. But the Faster Payments Council was convened in 2015. So, we do have to kind of think in a measured way about how much time it takes to get from point A to point B. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it gives time for planning. It gives time for preparation. It gives time for reflection. We do have the opportunity to sit and think critically about, we can look across the landscape and see everything going on, but for my FI, for my financial institution, or for, if I'm a fintech, for my book of business, where I have markets where my product serves really, really well, I can think critically about the bits and pieces that really and truly add the value. I'm a big proponent that everything we do should chase the real value proposition. And if we can, if we can peel away the noise from that, then we build the plan that works for our clients based on what they really need. And we stay alert. I think in education, they call it spiral learning, where we get educated at a high level across the scope of a thing. And then the next time it comes up, it's a little deeper or different features or spotlights on it. I am a huge proponent that knowledge is power. There is no substitute for knowing what the data and the facts and the substance of a thing is. And so even if you don't have a fully fleshed out Treasury Services suite of products, or a Treasury Services division, or even if you don't have a role in the organization that is dedicated full time just to that, there are stakeholders in the organization who can and should realistically be developing kind of some layered depth of knowledge around this stuff, even if it's not in the wheelhouse today. There may be a merger and acquisition at some point, or a market expansion opportunity that could make that a reality. Or there could be a new deal that comes to the table that has these features, and you may not be as far away from making them a reality as it feels like it is. And so from a perspective taking position, I would say, spend the time to do it. Get maybe not all at once, but get educated about where there's so much data available. So there's a then and now. There is so much information out there at fingertips right now that just wasn't accessible. The what you all do, as an example, just was not a reality 25 years ago. So we're not flying blind. We're not having to guess. And we're not having to make decisions that will, have that blind side attached to it, because we can start now. We can start building that, mental repository, however we choose to do that, around who the providers are, what's the product. It's one thing to know what positive pay is. It's another thing completely to understand what the real experience is for that treasurer at 11 o'clock in the morning, local time. So, those types of things, that's an ownership issue. If I'm sitting in an FI at any level, in any role, and if I'm the CEO, what is my ownership stake? What kind of a stakeholder am I? And to what extent do I need to be able, if the question were put to me, to answer the question about whatever fill in the blank subject is? And when you know you have time, or when you suspect realistically that you have time, you can use that time to develop and condition that kind of strategic control, so that when it comes time to execute those good tactics, you can line those up and do them quickly. You already have built the competencies and that body of knowledge in the organization to be able to do that. You can pick and choose which ones are relevant to you.
That's the one that comes to mind as you're talking through things, is the embedded finance side, right? I've definitely seen a lot of banks, to the point it's things that we do, we maybe just do them in a very different way, right? It's not available from that perspective. Or let's just say in a white label or gray label scenario, right? Certain products and things have to be requisitioned a certain way, right? And so I've seen a lot of banks, to your point, that have these opportunities come at them, or we could call them needs on one hand from a client or opportunities from a prospect that they're just completely unprepared to meet, right? And I think that's, for me, that's one that's kind of coming out of left field right now, back to the point of it's just banking. But the world's sort of shifting under our feet, but it's still just banking. So I think being able and being prepared to bend a little bit and
Right.
let's bend more quickly, if that makes sense. So I
Yeah.
see the speed and being able to be more malleable and meet with the opportunities, but I definitely feel the same way that you do, that nothing's really all that new, right? Or all that different. And I also think you had a great point that, let's just call it regulatory or compliance. It's not a burden, it's our strength, right?
Right.
Now, we're all enjoying this wonderful, strange time where the fintech crowd has us all questioning that sometimes, right? As they run around willy-nilly, but uh that's got to be our strength is the charter.
Well, I think you're, right on again about that, because the reality is, banks are going to be regulated. I mean, compliance, you hear the expression strategy eats or culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I would tell you, if you're a financial institution, compliance eats all of it by lunchtime. You know what I mean? That's the nature of the compliance. We can call it a burden. It is, I mean, it's a lot of work, and again, from a stakeholder position, you could, ask one person to do it and you know, make sure that you're ready for those meetings, sitting across the table from the regulators. But as a lifestyle in a financial institution, I'm a proponent that you can, again, bake those competencies in at, to varying extents, varying degrees, varying levels, all the way through the process. Because at the end of the day, whether you are reselling a product, whether it is on the whether it's on the embedded side where you brought it in, you're repackaging it, whether, you're just making a referral and you've decided, we feel confident that we can make these qualified referrals. Maybe I should have led with this. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a tax professional. I've never played one on TV. There's risk, when you get a third party involved in these conversations. And so you have to decide, that's a due diligence event, for your organization, right? You've got to decide, how comfortable are we? And again, it goes back to building that framework, how do we decide? And I know I'm preaching to the choir to an extent, in this setting, everybody does it because that's the nature of it, right? But, how do we, preview the things that we consider are vital or relevant or important? Because at the end of the day, the regulator, whether we've got a third party involved or not, the regulator is going to hold us accountable. That's an ownership issue, as though we were doing it ourselves. And so I think there's an opportunity for fintechs and other providers on the front end to have a due diligence package ready. I think a lot of your really robust providers will deliver their due diligence package with their proposal, because they'll say, hey, listen, we know these things are important to you. Here are the questions we can answer on the front end. And if you have more questions, let's have those discussions. But maybe that gives the peace of mind, to the financial institution to say, all right, we know that there's some substance here and we're not starting from scratch. The other thing we talked about is, while the compliance element feels like a burden, I think the other maybe elephant in the room is legacy platform conversion at the CFO's desk, because there may be, what are there, 4,100, community banks in the country right now. How many clients do they have, and how many different accounting systems do they have? Is it hundreds? Is it thousands? They're all different, and they're all going to have elements of compatibility. You can have, standardized data settlement frameworks. You can have APIs, but at the end of the day, that's not going to be a light switch conversion.
Mhm.
And that is going to, I suspect, give the time that we all crave to do that, that planning, that due diligence, that front end planning. So,
Well, it begs an important question, right? if we just sat down and said, let's talk core conversion, we should probably start with the first principle and say, is it worth it?
Right.
I mean,
Well, and
what's the
so
major problem? What's the major pain? What's the major gain? And juxtaposed against what is the time value, right? I mean, we're talking about probably a year of, reviewing products and scoping and planning, right? And then another year plus of
right.
conversions and everything else. And it's like, I don't know about you guys, but it would be really difficult for me to take pretty much any initiative that I have and push the pause button for 2 years. That's a heck of a loss. So there need to be a pretty tremendous gain or a big problem.
So, one of the valuable questions, baked into the why, is what are we really trying to accomplish here, right? What's driving the need to do this? Is it a service issue? Is it
Probably.
is it a lack of product? Is it the inability to meet the needs and the demand? And those are important questions, because if it's just an uncomfortable fit, maybe there are opportunities to negotiate better outcomes, better, service level agreements, things along those lines. But if there is not, then you may have to face some hard facts. But at the end of the day, you can, I think, and it just there seems to be an urgency, a want to have this done by the end of the fiscal year. And I would advocate that you have to get started. You have to think across the landscape and the horizon of what those features and factors are, and what you all provide in terms of visibility is tremendous. To be able to say, hey, here are the players. I mean, once upon a time, and I will always advocate the regional payment associations, the RPAs, who are the ACH experts. They're the ACH direct members, and the local AFP chapters. If you're in commercial payments, if you're in Treasury Services, if you are a stakeholder to that domain, those two organizations can bring so much value and so much dialogue and so much perspective. They can also be tremendously impactful in terms of figuring out who the vendors are and what the vendors do, because the vendors for these technology pieces are going to be the ones sponsoring the meetings, sponsoring the webinars, presenting the webinars, exhibiting in the showcases at conferences. And so, it seems to me that, if you've got to start building, you want to get your collector card set of all the vendors, for all this stuff started, that's a very good spend on the front end in terms of finding out who those providers are and what they offer. And making sure, and the RPAs for sure will help make sure that you're buttoned up in terms of your compliance and, in their respective wheelhouse. And there's a lot of access that can be had very organically in that respect. But there's a lot more for, what you all bring to the table, just LinkedIn, just being able to reach out and have a conversation and make a connection, those types of things that just were not a reality 15, 20, 25 years ago. It's a very different ball game. And so that, to me, should maybe help to ratchet down, and deleverage some of the reticence or anxiety around really starting to take bites of these apples and figure out, how do we start putting these pieces? How do we start putting these, these bits together?
Yeah, good call out. Dad, would you for a second, just because you were here a little bit before the internet, back to this theme of, where were things? Where are they today? Is this the craziest, scariest, most jumpy, wild changing time ever, right? Just think about banking and technology and all the things that you've seen. Would you just kind of touch on your perspective there a little bit? I'd love to hear it. I've heard a rant or two. I don't know if I've heard that rant before.
Yeah, I think I would kind of start with more like, no, it's not the biggest. It's not the most, craziest anticipation moment and all that. but at the same time, it's the most liberating. And liberating, I mean, new opportunities. It's like redefining banking. If you sit down 25, 50 years ago and talk to people and said, look, we're going to be able to break the chains of geography, those chains will no longer affect what you do. You're going to have opportunities to do things with your merchants that you've never been able to do before, that'll bring in amazing dollars into your institution. You'll be able to attack your net interest margin from a completely different perspective than you've ever been able to do. It's not about income as much as it is lowering expenses. The regulatory burden, yeah, at the same time, there's a regulatory question mark out there because they're not leading the charge on innovation. They're following along, slapping the shit out of people that do things wrong, but haven't killed anybody yet. And so it's like, okay, it's maybe not that painful to live through this thing. For the banker, if you just sit down and said, what am I trying to solve? Let's start at the top level of what you're trying to solve. Am I trying to, increase my net interest margin? Am I trying to knock out expenses? Am I trying to do something? What is it you want to do when you grow up, right? I really want to turn this thing from an ag bank into a really powerful business bank. Okay. Once you get to that point and you've kind of sit down and said, what do I need to do? And respectfully, I mean, I kind of disagree with some of this, that we don't need to ask others all the time. There's data, and the data can be such a help these days because, I mean, if you sit down and said, let me check out this vendor, Fiserv, do they have 3 references? I'm going with, duh. Yeah, they have 3 references. Okay, so we don't need to go out here and find out. What you need to find out is if you said, look, then again, to be specific, I'm going to open up a program, a card program that's going to help embedded finance for my merchant customers so I don't lose them. And maybe even get somebody in that process that can bring new merchants to me. Okay, that's my goal. If that was my goal, and I was to sit down and say, how do I go about that? There are people that have done this successfully, and there are records of that success. Okay. And it doesn't mean there wasn't a blip along the way with a consent order that came along with it, especially if they're leading the charge, right? So then you become, it's really more of a data exercise at that point. How many vendors, how many banks have they done this successfully for? All right, I've got somebody that's got 25 or they got 15 institutions they've done this really successfully for, and they've perfected the process. That's the guy I want to talk to. I don't necessarily need to go listen to everybody on the internet confuse the shit out of me because most people don't know what they're talking about. And so I think it really becomes an exercise in identifying what you want to do and then finding out the people that have done that successfully. That's where I think it's kind of interesting to talk to people like us, is that we know all the vendors, we know the mistakes that have been made, and we can tell people the shortcut, and we have the data.
That's honestly, it's kind of funny, Stephanie. It's like, if somebody was to ask me where, I love the word expert. I'm like, my goodness, nobody who's an expert would ever call themselves one. I damn sure wouldn't call myself an expert. But if I was to pick something that, like, what am I an expert at? I know who the experts are. That's honestly what we're the best at, right? And that is a cool time. And you and I talked about a little bit about that. You mentioned Peter Davey on Let's Talk, payments as an example. Like, absolutely an expert, right? There's folks that are, not only are they very niche experts in their respective areas of banking, but they're accessible and they're vocal, to your point. I think that's really important.
Yeah. And I think, thinking again about the before and the after, a lot of that just was not there before, and so I think, as you're thinking about, the perspective of, where do we go next, or do we go at all? Do we wait to see what AI is going to do to all of this? Do we make the spend and, the commitment now? Will the landscape look completely different in 5 years? That's a big gamble right now. And so, looking across the horizon and making sure we understand to some degree of depth relative to, what our market share and our market plan is across products and services and vendors. I think there's merit to that. But my hat is off to you all in terms of, what you do to close the gap around what was just a blindness before. There just was not that type of, I guess, repository of that information. And then, the human piece is to be able to pick up the phone and call you guys and say, hey, what do you know about this? What information is available? Who can we talk to? Can you introduce me to thus and such so that we can hear directly from them? If you had those, and a lot of executives do and did and could pick up the phone and could call their peers at other institutions and ask and have those conversations. But to have all that data synthesized, to Dave's point, to be able to get to those pieces of the conversation faster,
Right.
Especially on the bigger spends, especially on the core related types of things. That's a big differentiator today. And that should be a lot of peace and peace of mind, and opportunity.
Something that happens, I think, a lot is, and I don't want to throw, names or darts at anybody or even a portion of the industry. Let's just keep this super generic. That when you're paying somebody to do something, I'm going to turn your son into the best center in football. Okay, as long as the paycheck's pretty cool here, I'm going to keep working at this, even if your kid sucks, right? So, I mean, there is a point out there where
Hey,
we all
you only have one kid on this call, so be cool.
Okay, so
You're on TV, man. Be cool.
that's right. So what happens out there somewhere is we kind of get what we deserve to a certain extent with what we're trying to do. At Bankers Helping Bankers, one of the things that, early on, I was like, you're going to need to do this at a level that's never been done before, and you're never going to need to do it for free. Everybody's like, what's the matter with you? Have you lost your marbles? And it's like, everybody has been lied to by everyone for so long. No one knows where there's a source of truth, and you have to provide that source of truth. And the best way to do it is, take your clothes off, take your shirt off, stand up and say, there's nothing to hide, right? And I'm going to help you for free. And I'm not going to tell you yes when the answer is, I don't know. I don't know is an okay answer sometimes.
Absolutely.
And to be able to set up a situation to where you can actually be a lifeline. I want to buy a vowel. I want to phone a friend and ask her, okay, you got that right there. That's what's needed in the industry. And that's kind of that void that we wanted to fill. Thank God we've had sponsors that believed in that have been able to, allow us to keep that going. The volume of the calls and the volume of the bankers that we've helped. Oh my goodness. It's a hockey stick. But at the same time, that's something that we're pretty prideful about, that, hey, we're doing some good here, right? And again, I watched Tanner multiple times tell people that that's a gray area for us. It's not our expertise. It's not something we really know the answer to. And I've never heard somebody, again, you pay me $100,000 a day to come teach your kid how to be the best center in football, and I won't find a weakness in that kid. Anything that we can't fix, that's for sure, right? And so you get into that moment of being able as a banker to say, what's reality and what's the bullshit? And filtering through that is tough.
And even being able to discern, just to have the opportunity to have some parity, to do a little bit of peer evaluation to say, is this question as relevant as I think it is? Is this something that, if it's helping you filter relevance, if it's helping you filter urgency, if it's helping you better evaluate the opportunity, so you can determine whether or not the cost is as intimidating as you think it is.
Yep.
Those are the types of connectional values that were harder to come by once upon a time. They were harder, to get that, that type of perspective, that the data and the analytics married with that personal, interpretation, that personal connection, and that relay, the relay back to the source of that field data. That's the type of thing that I think can be or should be very, very motivating to an FI.
Man, I'll tell you what, a lot of people don't like to say this out loud, but if you're below $1 billion today, you had better figure this out. Hang on, did y'all hear that? That was my squeaky toy with my dog. I think he's trying to tell us something in Morse code. Yep, he's actually agreeing with us that that's the case, that you're going to need to do something. And I think there's more opportunities right now. This is the part that gets me frustrated and excited at the same time, is that there's more choices and more opportunities. We've got a bigger menu of neat things that we can do than we've ever had before.
Give you a couple minutes for final thoughts, man. This has been an awesome conversation. We've covered a ton of ground, but take a couple minutes, give us final thoughts.
Yeah, I am. There are subject matter experts out there all over the place. And you could probably do an hour indefinitely if you wanted to on these podcasts talking about the products and talking about the technology and synthesizing what there's a lot of noise in this segment or that segment. What is AI actually going to do? Is it doing it yet, or is it just doing what it's programmed to do? Which there's a lot of consensus, and you don't have to Google hard to find it, that right now it's doing what it's programmed to do. But the reality is that there's a lot of time that will be natural to the implementation of all of the aspects of these things. And so if you are a community bank or a credit union or an FI, and you have ideas about what you want to do, but not a plan, even a general plan, whether you've gotten into the tactical weeds or not, just a strategic plan. Dave, to your point, you've got to do it. You've got to take the time to think through, what's happening here. How are we stakeholders? Why are we stakeholders? And what's on the horizon with regard to being stakeholders, based on what's going on in our markets, the ones we're in or the ones we would like to be in. And then how do we, prepare ourselves, to begin the process of, deciding, what products go first, what technology does that need, who does that affect? And there's science to it, there's art to it. It's highly subjective, but I hope that if I'm bringing anything to this discussion, it's some peace of mind that we're not having to reinvent the wheel. There's so much accessible information now that would have been nice to have had once upon a time, way back when. But today, there's a lot out there, and you don't necessarily have to hire a team of subject matter experts, right, to Tanner's point. So it can be easy to let the perceived cost of things slow you down a little bit, when you can maybe flip the script a little bit and look at the opportunities and chart a course accordingly. So I appreciate you all creating an opportunity for me to participate in the dialogue. I am new to my return to the field. And so it looks like there may be some opportunities emerging for me to have some discussions to facilitate, some of this thinking and some of this dialogue.
What would be cool is to have this discussion, 6 months from now, when you like, okay, I walk back in, this is what I found, and then, oh wow, right, and see what you really got from that. And it's just it's a neat perspective.
Yeah, thank you. I know there are a lot of us out there, in the Treasury domain, and there may be tons of us who have walked this same walk and who have experienced this same thing. And I'm, I don't think I'm spilling any tea here. I certainly don't, speak on behalf of any former employers or organizations, with any granularity, and I wouldn't do that. But just to talk about, the iterations of these things and how it just feels so familiar. There's so much disruption, so much noise, and there wants to be so much anxiety and uncertainty attached to it, but there doesn't have to be. You can have some, some control over the experience for your organization, for your marketplace, and certainly for your deliverable. And there's a lot out there. You guys bring so much to, that workflow. Just by virtue of what you do, that I appreciate you, just for being who you are.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I think my takeaway, guys, is going to be your strategy could be as simple as to come up with a strategy.
Yeah.
That's better than no strategy. And anything is better than buying your strategy. right?
Well, no, can you? I mean, can you? You can spend money on it if you want
Please
to, but are you
fold your
getting strategy? Are you
You
getting your
fold it.
strategy? Or are you just getting some strategy?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. Really enjoyed it. Look forward to catching up with you soon, and welcome back. Let us know how we can help.
Thanks very much, guys.